Oh, good to see you. You got your hair and makeup on?
Yeah. I know. It's just like I need just a little touch up.
Yeah. All the barbers and that will be closed up your way, are they?
I know. Thankfully, I get my hair cut just before it. But
Right. I did the same when they announced they were going into full lockdown in England again. I literally the next day, I think they announced on the Saturday, and I like Monday morning got up, went to a barber because it was getting long. You know what I mean? It was already like, oh, I probably should go in the next month or so.
yeah,
I'm really bad. I let it get really long, then get it all cut off, and then just let it get really long again. I'm very lazy with my hair.
I used to be like that, but I've gotten into the habit now of when I go to it's just a little barber's. It's a lady that runs it. She's really good. And I make an appointment. I say, okay, book me in for 4 weeks, even though I don't need an appointment.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
just, you've
like
got that, you.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah.
I need to do that.
Yeah, otherwise I'd be like, I'll go next week. I'll wait until the month's finished. You know, it's like
it's just a constant hassle that you just push off. You know, you're looking in the mirror and you're like, I'm not hideous. I'll be fine.
It's like shaving. Oh,
it is like shaving. Yeah, well, mine is always patchy. You know,
it's like, see, if I could grow it round this side, I would. But
yeah,
I just get little patches here.
Yeah, well, mine starts like creeping up when it gets very like fuzzy up the top. So Till's always like, oh, you want to trim or the moustache? If you look closely, it kind of creeps right over the lip.
I just doesn't like that. So it's like, you can actually see my lip now.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. How are you doing? You doing all right?
Good, thanks. Yeah. Recovering. Yeah. We had COVID, so but I'm just starting to kind of come out of that. The symptoms went after a week or so, but just a lot of tiredness, Phil. Really sleeping a lot, you know, and exhausted really easily. But starting to come out of that now.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. No, I when I had it in March, I was about 3 weeks after no symptoms before I was running up the stairs and going. You know, I run everywhere. I don't do anything slow. But it was about 3 weeks before I was actually running up the stairs and then not realizing, oh yeah, I shouldn't do that, because even a couple of weeks afterwards, I'd run up the stairs, I'd get about halfway and I'd be like, oh my God. And it's crazy, isn't it? How much it can be.
It's nuts.
Yeah.
And it's, really I think we've gotten off lightly, you know, compared to what I see from other people. But for some people, it's the long-term effects that...
It's a bit scary, eh? Some of those, things that people
I thought I'd be in real trouble because I have a touch of asthma,
right?
You know, but I've been all right. Thank God, you know.
Yeah, one of my close friends has asthma, and he is like, and it's very bad actually. But he has just like locked himself down. Like we haven't seen him since March, basically.
Wow.
But he contacted like the asthma clinic or whatever it is, and they said like, I wouldn't risk it. You know, maybe see your family or whatever in the garden occasionally, but like, I just wouldn't risk being around new people.
Wow, so they've suggested he shields himself.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but I guess, I mean, there's a whole range of asthma, isn't there? And, So, but yeah, it's wild. I was talking to, one of my partners yesterday, do Skypes every now and again. And, I think their sister had it and she's now got like COPD from it.
Wow.
So like got like long-term lung effects now. So, it's
wow.
crazy how it hits different people, like in different ways.
COPD is what you expect minors or someone to get, you know, like all the dust and everything.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It's really full on. But apparently she was pretty lucky as well, because she was in a coma and all sorts. I mean, it's just wow. The stories that you hear, and obviously the ones you hear are the crazy, right? No one hears like mine or your stories where, you know, you get better and it's relatively fine. But like, it's such a range, isn't it? But I guess it's probably like that with a lot of things, isn't it?
I guess the problem is though, if they put our stories on the news, 3 weeks and everyone's out going, I had COVID. Well, a few weeks off work, you know, it's like
feels like a lot of people are like that anyway.
That's true. Yeah.
Oh,
what do you mean the pubs are closed?
Exactly. Well, I was talking to one of my neighbours just after I'd had it back in April, I think it was, and he was saying that his son's wife's mother had just died of COVID, and they were having garden parties every day still. And they're older people, like, have one of them has very big problems with her lungs and her heart. And I'm just like, you actually know someone that died of this, and you're still like, but it's just the flu, really, isn't it? And it'll be fine. And I was like, well, if I had a higher chance of getting the flu with your conditions, I'd be a bit careful, to be honest with you. But they're still with us, and lots of them. I mean, yeah. But it's fascinating how different people approach these kind of situations. I'm a very cautious person. Till is less cautious than me. So we kind of like, she's like, whatever the regulations are, I will live within those just. Whereas I am like, I'm going to go a whole other level of caution. I'm very safe, driven, a safety driven person for sure.
Yeah. I'll go to the boundaries kind of thing.
Yeah, you're like Till.
I won't step over them.
Well, I don't know. If Till wasn't married to me, I don't know. Should be really testing a few. We'll put this onto the podcast and put it out there. Everyone, message Tilly and tell her to stay on the rules. No, she's always like, oh, what's the rules? Is there any chance the rules changing this week? You know, I mean, she's constantly wanting to see friends or do something. And I am as well.
I mean, I'm pretty introverted and I don't really miss people, but I really want to see people now. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, it gets to a point for any introvert where you're like, okay, no, I'm not introverted anymore.
This is enough
for some people.
I mean, if it hadn't been for the fact that Fiona's in my life, I probably would have been going nuts by now.
Yeah.
But because I've got that company, I've got someone else to bounce off and talk to, then it's made it more tolerable.
Yeah. No, same for me. Absolutely. And I think just Tilly, I think both Tilly and I are both like, okay, yeah, but enough of you. Let's have some friends as well. So that's, even that finds its limits, doesn't it? Where you're suddenly like, okay, yes, but not bored of you, but that tank is full and I've got a different tank that is new people with new experiences and different stories.
I mean, Fiona's been fortunate in that she's been working until,
of course.
You know, she contracted the COVID.
Yeah.
Probably from me, but hey. I keep trying to say, nah, you probably got it from the janitor. You know, it's like, but I think she actually got it from me.
Well, Till's like got this constitution where like she just doesn't get ill very much, and when she does get ill, like I'll be like, you've been a bit like sluggish the last 3 days. You got up like half an hour later than usual, and things like that. She's like, oh yeah, I've got really bad colds, but it's fine. And I'm like, you're kidding me? You know, I have a slight sniffle and I'm out.
It's not a man cold, Phil.
That's it.
Not man flu.
Someone was telling me the other day, I was at a documentary and they were saying there's something to do with estrogen levels that affects how you process the cold. And that's why actually men, I think there's a component of whatever everyone feeding on a thing or certain people like to be babied a bit more or whatever, but there is a component where actually they because they have lower estrogen generally speaking, they really do fight the cold better when they're pampered or they get that touch or all these different components that boost your estrogen. And so there might be something there.
Interesting. Yeah.
Either way, I want any excuse I can to be a big baby when I'm cold, because when I've got a cold, I'm just like,
rub my head and say, poor little bunny.
That's it, yeah. That's a great sketch.
That's great, isn't it?
Oh, it's absolutely amazing. Yeah, he's got his little bell.
Yeah, that's it.
I love it. John, how much time have you got today? Have you got a good chunk of time?
I've got a free morning.
Okay, great. We're usually hour and a half, 2 hours, something in that window. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. But I'm excited. I'm really, really stoked. I want to expose people to your story because you've got an amazing story. And then, God, talk about everything and anything. I mean, this
where it goes.
Where we can go is exciting.
I did a great chat yesterday with a lady called Natalie Collins, who works with in the area of domestic abuse.
Oh, wow.
Oh, fabulous. I mean, probably talked for about 90 minutes or something, but
yeah.
So, because quite often I'll do post recording the editing and stuff, but I'm thinking like, I don't think I want to edit any of this.
Yeah.
Good.
I love when you sit down with someone on a podcast, and I mean, pretty much any of my podcasts I enjoy. I just want to tell you the story kind of thing. But there's certain people that you just click with, and you just and then you look at the clock and you're like, crap, I have to stop, and I don't want to. those
I
are
could have
the,
spoken
those are
with
the
her for
podcasts.
another hour. There was so much more we could have talked about.
Yeah.
But I thought, oh, and
Wow.
you know, so
Sorry, itchy foot.
I'll get that up before Christmas.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, big topic, that one.
Yeah.
You're doing quite a variety of things then. As
Yeah,
far as other podcasts.
initially I thought I was going to set this up to just do like Father's Love kind of thing. And I thought, do you know what? There's so much more going on that all I'm going to do is preach to the choir if all I do is talk about the Father's love. You know, that might inform a lot of what I believe and what I do, but actually there's so much more. And, you know, just I've been connecting with trans women and trans men on Twitter and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, those ones who are on the other side of the debate of the whole gender spectrum thing, who are saying like, no, you're harming trans people, you know, with all this fetishism and stuff. So it's just been fascinating. I'm just like, man, do I dare get one of those guys on the podcast?
Are your audience ready for that?
I know. Well, that's what I'm thinking. It's like, and I don't care about losing listeners or something, but I want it to be something that people will be like, wow, you know, this is, I'm learning stuff here.
Yeah.
So I'm debating with myself about whether to get one of those guys on.
Yeah.
Girls.
Yeah. Oh, I had someone on recently, and I kept saying guys or stuff like that, or hey man, or whatever. And they just pangender. They didn't identify as, it was just they or whatever. And they were like, oh, it's fine, don't worry about it. But like the fact you're aware is a big deal. But I'm like, the defaults we have of like, oh hey guys, and you're talking to a room of like 3 women, and you're like, why did I say guys? Like I need to kill that somehow.
I'm trying to train myself to say hi folks or something. You know?
Yeah. It's a big one, isn't it, folks? Yeah.
So not even like hi ladies, but just keep it neutral and delete. But I slip into, oh guys, that's brilliant, and it's like, oh, they're not guys.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have a lot of grace, but especially when you're conscious and you're in your triumph. But that's a huge deal, though, isn't it? Because I went through this massively with my ministry, is when I was running a very Christian ministry, like you, and in a lot of ways, like what you were saying there, of like the danger of preaching to a choir. That was me for a long time, just preaching to this choir. And the choir was growing. It was a bigger choir, but it was the same people believing the same things that just wanted to hear what I had to say and pat themselves on the back for already believing it, basically.
Yeah.
And then you realize, I want to move people to where I am, which is a very different place in a lot of ways.
Yep.
But if I just give them where I'm at, so many of them are just going to walk away. And there's maybe a path I can take them on. Maybe I don't expose them to the full extent of this. Maybe I expose them to some ideas, or maybe expose them to someone that's maybe going to challenge them but not shock them to the extent where they're like, oh, John's a heretic, I'm done. Like, how do you navigate that? Like, how are you, because that feels like maybe something that you're trying to get your head around now. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm just coming to the point, Phil, where I'm like, you know what, I don't want to upset people, but unless I need to be true to myself. Be free to say, like, this is who I am, this is where I'm at. Not to throw something in someone's face, but to just be like, you know what? These are the areas where I am uncomfortable with traditional Christianity, or modern Christianity, if you like. You know, and try and approach it from that perspective, so that people are like, yeah, they have been a little bit uncomfortable with that. And once you get over that hurdle, you can start to say, and this is where my thinking is going, you know. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm sure I'll get it wrong and I'll upset people, but hey, I've upset people before and I'm still alive.
No, it's I guess we're both probably well versed in upsetting people, but it's a real tricky thing, because like it's just a very natural human reaction not to want to push people away, to upset people, to hurt people. And yet it's probably on some level part of the parcel. Some people are going to get hurt. Some people are going to go, that's it. I knew that John was up to no good, or I knew he was a snake in the grass, or whatever. You know, there's going to be some people, but maybe there's always been those people anyway. But it does feel a bit more. Sorry. Yeah, go for it.
That's okay. I think what I'm doing and what you're doing, I think there's a prophetic edge to it as well, though, Phil. You know, where
tell me about that.
It's challenging the prevalent spirit. to say, because I think there is I use the language because it's what people understand, but I don't mean a demonic spirit, I just mean a spirit up in the people in modern religion, which is happy with the narrative that they have. And I think the prophetic comes to disturb the narrative and set people, not necessarily to say these are the answers, but perhaps saying these are the questions you should be asking, you know?
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, there's a bit of a prophetic edge in cutting against the prevalent spirit within religion. Well, the religion we're familiar with is Christianity, you know. I don't even like being called a Christian anymore. Well, it's got so many negative connotations, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. There is this kind of like, I'm a Christian. Oh, you're X, Y, Z. I mean, they suddenly fill in this book, you know, they can go, oh, John is hypocritical, he's judgmental, he's, you know, whatever their experience or whatever. Yeah. Maybe their experience is like, I know some like conventional Christians would meet you and they're like, oh, you're a Christian? Oh, he's the best thing ever. He's safe. Yep. He's, you know, he believes in the Lord. He's a Bible believing Christian. Or, you know, like, so different people will have a different checklist when they hear that word. But, yeah, I'm with you. It's a really problematic,
but I think
component.
It's interesting that he believes the Bible.
Well, exactly. They might get in real trouble ticking either type of box. But yeah,
I believe that Paul was right when he said the scriptures are useful for instruction and training, but beyond that, I'm not sure.
That's funny. Like the manual for your microwave.
I know. Yeah, I know it doesn't say that, but if you press that button, it works anyway.
I love it. That's funny. Well, John, why don't you maybe we should dive into some of your stories so people can kind of get to know like where you came from, how you got involved in Christianity, and then you know how you have shifted into a place where you're like, oh, I don't really like that word Christianity actually. Like what was some of the journey like? Where did you start out? You didn't start out in church.
No.
Good lads every Sunday on the Wednesdays, on the Fridays, you know.
I was
every meeting.
I guess I was just a kind of nice kid until my dad died when I was 11. I grew up in working class Glasgow. Lots of gangs, a lot of, you know, in the 60s. I was in primary school in the 60s. Teenager in the 70s. Probably a year or two after my dad died, I started to hang out with the gangs. The time I was 12, I was drinking. I, you know, had knives held at my throat and all sorts of things. I'd been bullied a little bit as a kid, so that kind of gave me an angry edge as well as the death of my dad giving me this angry edge. So yeah, I was a little bit wild, taking time off school when I felt like I didn't want to go anymore. I think we moved from Glasgow to Cumbernauld in 1975. Yeah, 75. And so I knew we were moving in the December, so I just didn't go to school when it started again in August. You know, I just thought, yeah, I'm leaving anyway, so what's the point? Left school, got a couple of jobs. I mean, this was the 70s when I left school, so you walked out of one job and into another one if you wanted to. So I think within the first couple of years of my working life, by the time I was 18, I'd had like 4 or 5 jobs.
Wow.
You know, because I just...
What was that for, like, that you kind of ended up bouncing around so much, do you think?
I was just restless. I was what people might call rebellious. Disregard for authority, that kind of thing. You know, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'll punch the ref and lights out. And really that's the way my teens went. I was drinking heavily, probably around the age of 15 or 16, probably 16, 17. I got into drugs. mainly dope, and then I discovered sulfate, speed powder, acid, mushrooms. Still doing a bit of dope, occasionally a bit of cocaine, and I was very hedonistic by the time I reached my late teens.
Were you having a good time? Because there's this idea in the teens of going wild and having that crazy season, and summer, especially when drugs, there's kind of like two narratives there, isn't there? There's the narrative like, oh, they were trying to just destroy themselves and numb everything, and the other one is the kind of more hedonistic of like, I'm just trying to have fun and explore. And
I think it was a bit of both, actually, Phil.
Okay.
My life, I kept myself busy because, and I think a lot of us do this today in society, we don't want to look at what's inside. We don't want to deal with the pain or the regrets or the fears or any of those things. And so we find something else to occupy our time, whether it's alcohol, whether it's hedonism, whether it's work or DIY about the house, whatever. We find things to distract us from the real issues, which are mostly internal, to be honest. Yeah, I know circumstances can create difficulties for us, but actually the real issues are internal issues. I didn't understand that back then, but on reflection, that I was trying to distract myself from my issues, but also I was a young guy. I was looking for a good time, So alcohol, drugs, parties, nightclubs, girls, that was part of it. But there were times when I would be in the bar with my friends, and I hung out with guys who were in bands and all of that kind of stuff as well, local Scottish bands. And I just felt so alone.
Yeah.
In the midst of all of this partying, and there were nights, especially closer to the time when I became a believer, I just was bored with it, But what else do I do? I've got no qualifications. I left school with like 2 O levels, So I've no qualifications. I'm doing jobs, working behind the bar, cooking in a kitchen, washing pots in a hotel, working in a concrete factory. I even worked at funeral suppliers, Robertson Street in Glasgow. I even worked in the circus. I worked a season up in Aviemore. I went up to Aviemore in June 1978 and worked in a few of the hotels and stuff there. And the circus came in to Aviemore. And so I thought, I'm going to go and ask them if there's any work going. So I worked with them for a month or so.
Were you on your unicycle juggling, or?
No, I was one of the... I hate using this term, but it's what I was. I was one of the ring boys.
Okay.
So when the elephant pooped in the ring, I would run.
Someone's got to scoop it
up and all that, all that kind of stuff. And you had to do it a certain way. You had to turn the sole of your foot so that the shovel would go against the sole of your foot and scrape up the dung. And you told the curtain closed before you let the horses out and all this kind of thing. And kind of So I had a quite a varied career.
Yeah, it sounds it for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. I ran my own second-hand clothes business and all of that kind of stuff. When I get into my 20s, I was doing that. I lost everything in a fire. I don't know if you would know Glasgow at that time, but they had a What Every Woman Wants store on Argyle Street, and the building was all shored up. So we rented a flat in that building, and it burned down like a few days after we moved in, actually.
Perfect.
So I woke up and my bed was on fire.
Wow.
2 o'clock in the morning or something ridiculous. Managed to get my flatmates out. Myself and another male flatmate, we shared a bedroom. There was a huge room, and the girl that was sharing the flat with us had her own room. So I got them out. And I mean, back then I slept naked. So it was like, I'm standing on the stairs with all this plaster and glass falling around me. And this copper's like, right, on you come, son. You're okay. And I was like, no, I'm not going out here. I'm not going out there like this. Give me your coat. So he gave me his coat. So that no, don't get out. It's bad enough getting out my bare feet,
good call.
But my bare backside as well. It was like,
oh my gosh.
So I remember
terrifying.
I remember we slept in one of my friend's flats. He was the manager of the Bluebells, young at heart and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, yeah.
So we slept in his flat, and there were other kids sleeping there. So we got up in the morning, we're chatting, and they just assumed we were the Bluebells, my flatmate and me. So we were like, yeah. No, Bobby's not here. So yeah, there's stupid things like that.
I love it. I love it. So how did this all suddenly shift into the Christian world? Like how did you stumble across? It was, did you seek that out, or did someone find you? Or?
Although my family weren't religious, my dad's family were Roman Catholic, my mum's family were all Orangemen and Masons and stuff. So a bit of a mixture in 1960s Glasgow. But part of the deal of my mum and dad marrying in the Roman Catholic Church was that the kids would be brought up Roman Catholic.
Okay.
So I did all that, Scouts, Catholic Boys Club and all that kind of stuff. Nothing ever happened to me, by the way, listeners. No one did anything to me. But I kind of just, when my dad died, it was empty. No meaning in it for me. So I just stopped. I stopped going to mass on a Sunday. I'd jump the fence and go up to my friend's house, and it's the old thing. You'd meet someone and say, like, okay, what colour were the priest's vestments and all that kind of stuff. It's like,
get your alibi sorted.
My mum never quizzed me, but it was just in case.
Just in case, yeah.
I mean, even when I went, I didn't understand what the priest was talking about. I was an altar boy for a few years and stuff like that. But so that I think that's when I started to get involved in the gangs and alcohol and everything else, the violence. By the time I was 17, I'd been stabbed. I had all my teeth knocked out in a gang attack by a group of guys in town. I have 2 of my original teeth. That's it.
Wow. Gosh. Well, that explains your perfect smile, I guess. Yeah. Compared to mine, it's a bit more higgledy-piggledy. That's what I should have done as a teenager. Got a good
you can add the sparkle later.
That's it, yeah.
But
fantastic.
So with the drugs and the partying and everything else, I began to bump into a lot of friends from the schemes that were I lived. By this time, I'd moved away from the schemes. I left Cumbernauld, was living in bedsits in the West End of Glasgow, trying to be cultured, going to the Citizens Theatre and all that kind of stuff, but still willing to punch anyone's lights out that tried anything. So I was a bit of a hybrid creature.
Yeah.
I was still looking for who am I guess. Yeah. Again, on reflection, I was looking for who am I? Where do I fit in this world? And so I started meeting all of these guys who I used to know from gangs and from the housing schemes, and they're all talking to me about Jesus. Now I couldn't get far enough away from them. And I was like, man, these guys have done too much acid. And I'd go into the pub to try and get away from them, and they'd come into the pub and sit and drink orange juice and stuff. I was like, they're fucking weird.
Yeah.
They're nuts. It's like, but I guess it was speaking to something in my heart that I didn't even know was there, and then I met Fiona, who's now my wife. This was March 85. I was up to no good, and her friend introduced us and stuff, Don't want to see on camera what no good I was up to.
Statute of limitations has kicked in, I'm sure.
That's sure. Well, a friend was buying something from me.
That's funny.
A work colleague of Fiona's. It was a place where I frequented and did a little bit of selling. And so we started dating, and I started sleeping up at her house in her brother's bedroom and reading his books. And I read a couple of books. I read all of his books, and I'm talking like The Secret Seven, The Famous Five, because there was all these Christian books and I just wasn't going near them. But eventually I thought, I could read some of the Christian books. This one looks good, Hell's Angel. A guy called, is it Brian Greenaway? I think it's Brian Greenaway. the guy's name is. He was a Hell's Angel, drugs,
Okay.
alcohol, violence, ended up in prison, found Jesus in prison and all that kind of stuff. It really impacted me, which I wasn't expecting. And then I read Nicky Cruise's book, Run Baby Run.
Yeah.
Again, the violence, and I think he talked a lot about what was going on inside him, and that really connected with me.
Mm.
And then I think Fiona's brother, that in November 85, he was preaching at their local Church of Scotland, Presbyterian Church. And he said, "Do you want to come?" And I was like, okay. So I went with Fiona's family, and I'm sitting here in the church, and Fiona's part of the Girls' Brigade, so they have a Girls' Brigade parade, so they're over here in the church. I'm sitting myself, like...
That's the worst, isn't it? When someone brings you to church and they're like, "Oh, I've got actually, I'm on that duty and I'm doing that, so good luck."
I'm like,
left on your own.
This is rubbish. I never go to church now except at Christmas Eve. And I usually get skinful. And he just told a very simple story about Jesus coming into the world, and I found myself saying, I wouldn't say I prayed a sinner's prayer. I was just like, you know what, God, I've done everything else. I've done sex and drugs and rock and roll and politics and, socialism and right on, brother, and all that kind of stuff. And okay, let's give this a go. I'm willing to give this a try.
Yeah.
And I remember before I left the church, I had this really weird thought, really persistent, strong thought. You need to stop sleeping with your girlfriend. I was like, that's nonsense. What a load of rubbish. But it was really persistent, And we went back to Fiona's mum's house. That Sunday dinner was at Fiona's mum's house, and like relatives would come over and all the rest of it, And so Fiona and I are in the kitchen. She's like listening to say something. I was like, I need to say something that's like really weird. I said, like, I keep thinking we need to stop sleeping together. And she was like, she just looked at me and I was like, what? She said, that's what I was going to say. So that freaked me out because I was like, shit, this God stuff's real.
Yeah.
What are the chances that I'm sitting here thinking that and she's sitting there thinking that, and it's like, oh, no way. What I didn't know was that during the time I was saying to God, okay, I've tried everything else, Fiona felt God was saying to her, okay, you need to choose between me and him.
Mm.
And she was going to dump me. She chose God.
It's unbelievable, Sean. I mean, you didn't match up to God. I know.
What's the guy got that I don't?
Exactly. Oh, that's funny. That's really funny.
So, and then, I phoned, it's funny, I phoned my friend who I'm still friends with and I still connect with today, even though he lives down in Southend. I phoned him up. I was in an amateur dramatics thing at Langside College, and I was there one night and I got to the payphone. I phoned him up. I was like, John, I've done it. And he was like, oh no, you in trouble? You in jail? And I was like,
is this your wrong call?
I've done it. And he was like, calm down, tell me what's happened. I was like, I became a Christian. He thought I was in jail or something.
It's funny.
I'd murdered someone or something.
Wow. So it feels like initially this is a very like tentative, like, I've tried everything else. There's something about this. Maybe I'll give it a shot. Like, did you dive kind of straight in? Did you go, all right, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it? Or was it very much a kind of like, oh, I'll just kind of go along to church every now and again? And
a lot of those friends of mine had been part of a Nazarene church in Govan. And in the summer of 85, it just seemed God was doing stuff amongst all these young people, and lots of them were becoming believers. And they wanted to do something in the scheme where they came from. So they went back to start something called Street Mission. It's now actually the Glasgow Vineyard, but back then it started as the Street Mission. And so we started travelling on the number 9 bus from Blairdardy in the northwest of Glasgow down to Pollock in the southwest of Glasgow. And just within. And I remember, you know, it was like happy clappy stuff. It wasn't charismatic or anything. I remember standing one day, like doing the clapping, and suddenly thinking, "This is like the Mormons. I've joined a cult. I'm in a cult." You know, it was like
that's so funny.
But very quickly, I was kind of teaching the kids and stuff, and just recognized that I had something in communication, and so God began to give me stuff to speak. So I started preaching and stuff like that. So I did dive in. I had the tracts in the back pocket and the Bible in the other back pocket, and you know, I stand at bus stops to complete strangers going, "Do you know Jesus?" You know, God loves you. They'd be like,
right. You became that guy.
Unfortunately, I did. Yes, I knocked on doors. I hated knocking on doors, but you know, you had to do it. You're safe to say.
Yeah. I think every human on the planet that has been through Christianity in some way, shape, or form knows that feeling of like, I don't want to do this, but I have to do it, and has thrown themselves into some form of a weird evangelistic.
I even went. Activity. I did street preaching at outside what's now the Glasgow Museum of Modern Art, but back then it was the old Stirling Library. So I did some street preaching out there, and I hated it again, but I had to do it.
I can't even imagine.
This is what Christians do, you know.
Yeah. Is that like literally get your soapbox, get up nice and high, and start yelling at people? Like, not
I didn't stand on a box, thankfully.
No, okay.
But it was like, you know, this is what Christians do. They shout at strangers in the street and tell them they're horrible and they're going to die and burn in the lake of fire, and you know,
you've got to convince them they're pieces of crap so they can get saved, right? I mean,
yeah, exactly.
Can't save good people.
Yeah, how can you tell people the good news unless you tell them the bad news first? I actually read that once.
Yeah. Oh, I might have even said that at some point in my past. Something like that. I've heard that a lot, so I'm like, it might have been from my own mouth at one point. I'm sure. Gosh.
Oh no.
It's terrible, isn't it? That's the way you think.
So that was kind of November 85 when I decided, okay, God, I'm going to go for it. And then by 87, I felt, I mean, I became a believer in November 85. And I remember sitting in a New Year's Eve watch night service in a Glasgow church on New Year's Eve of 85. And I remember turning to Fiona, watching this guy preach it, and I'm no joke, he had on a white suit and this silver grey hair and all that. You know, it was like...
Was it Benny Hinn?
No. No, I think Benny would have been too much for me then.
Oh, I mean, I think Benny's too much for most people at all times.
But and I remember turning to Fiona and saying, "This is weird, but I think God wants me to be a minister." And she looked at me and said, "Yeah, I know," and then started listening to the preacher again. That freaked me out. I was like, "How did she know? I've only just found out."
so funny. Yeah.
So there's this growing sense of like, and of course the only perception I had was of a priest or a reverend or something, you know.
Right.
And so I started thinking about, do I need to go to Bible training school and all that kind of stuff. I went for an interview with Faith Mission in 86, actually, over in Edinburgh. And they said I could go there, but I would have to postpone my wedding, and they don't think I should get married until I've done this. So I told them where to stick their college.
Yeah. Well, you were still not sleeping together, right? So, I mean, like, you had to sack you guys. We're getting married.
Come on. Dude, I can't hold out much longer.
Oh, bless.
So, and eventually I went to the Elam Bible College, which was then down in Nantwich in Cheshire. It's moved to the Malverns now. But, so I spent 3 years there. Didn't go into the ministry with them because at the time I was teetotal. I've gone through various periods in my life where I've been teetotal for a year, a couple of years, you know, and this was one of them. But in their constitution, you had to sign that that you would be teetotal, and you also had to sign that you believed in the premillennial.
Okay, yeah.
You know, which was very typical Pentecostal from the 1920s. And I said, well, I am teetotal, but I don't think that should be written into your constitution. I think that's a an infringement in people's rights to choose for themselves. And also said, I don't believe in the premillennial thing. Said, what do you believe then? Do you believe this, this, or this? And I was like, I don't know what you call it. I just didn't.
Yeah.
I just thought, that doesn't make sense to me. That's
that goes to show how well they taught on their eschatology, I guess. Isn't it?
The thing was, a lot of the lecturers who were lecturing us didn't believe it anymore. They believed it when they went in, but they had to start preaching it. And when they started studying it, they thought, nah, I don't think this is it for me anyway, you know.
I remember my, I don't know if I should say this, but who cares? No one's listening to this. My dad, when he left, so he left the Baptist church, but he was certified as a Baptist pastor. And so he ended up joining an AOG church, but he needed to get certified as a pastor so he could still do weddings or something. I can't remember how it works. But anyway, so he's like, oh, I'll just get certified AOG. And he talked to the pastor, and the pastor was like, yeah, sure. Like I'll talk to some people and we'll get you in. And so they got him in and everything. And then my dad looking at the 12 points, you have to write a short essay on each of the 12 points. And
I did that.
Some of them, I think some of them is you have to believe that speaking in tongues is evidence of faith. You have to, and I think end times is in there as well. And so I think those were his 2 ones that he was like, well, he's like, I'm not sure. He's like, I speak in tongues. He's like, and I believe that people can speak in tongues. I believe anyone can speak. And I don't believe it's evidence of faith. I think you can have faith and not speak in tongues.
Yeah.
And so he goes to the pastor. He's like, what's the deal? He's like, I don't believe like 3 out of 12 of these or whatever, 2 out of 12 of these. And he's like, just write an essay on it. Doesn't matter, does it? And I'm like, that's the pastor of this church. And it's just goes to show like there's so many people that these like rigid kind of organizations that are like, whatever, really, right? It's fascinating to me.
I know at the time that I was at that college that the leader, the general superintendent, liked a beer.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. It's fascinating. So fascinating how we can, at that point, it's rules for rules' sake.
Yeah.
You know? If people aren't doing it.
Because that's what they did in the 1920s when they set the movement up. And it's never changed. Well, it's changed a lot now. But up until that point, it hadn't really been challenged.
Yeah.
But myself, a handful of other people didn't go into the ministry then because of things like that. And it began to be brought to the attention of the assembly, the annual conferences.
Yeah. So Elim's like a more Pentecostal church, right? I mean, it is Pentecostal. So, I mean, was that something that you had been exposed to at this point? Was that quite a shock to you, the whole kind of Pentecostal charismatic kind of world?
When I became a believer, the things that people were introducing me to read were people like Samuel Brengle and stuff from the Salvation Army, things like that, the holiness movement. And there was a big focus on holiness and all that. But then we started going over to Drum Chapel was that later? I can't remember now. But no, over to a church in Drum Chapel that was charismatic.
Okay, yeah.
Called New Life. It's not there now, but and began to get exposed to some charismatic stuff, and we thought a lot of this is weird. I mean, I remember going over and they showed us a video of Benny Hinn preaching about the 10 plagues and all that kind of stuff, and I just thought, he's mental. And I don't
have a clue. Early charismatic. I mean, the 80s charismatic movement's really kind of birthing around the 70s. I mean, it's not a big deal at this point. Most people haven't been exposed to a lot of it.
And so I'm just thinking, I don't even have a clue what this guy's talking about in this video. But I was devouring Christian stuff, quite voraciously, and people were kind of impressed by how quickly I was growing in my knowledge.
Yeah.
Anyway, which is how we measure it, isn't it? We measure it by knowledge,
we do,
not by the life. And so when we went on honeymoon, the first week of our honeymoon, the church were very generous. They paid for a caravan at Loch Lomond, a week's groceries, all that kind of stuff. Really, really nice. And then the second week, we all went, as a church, we went to the Filey Bible Week in Skegness. And, people like Clive Calvert and those kind of guys were talking. Johnny, who's the trumpeter that played in the jazz clubs, died? Roy Castle. People like that were there, and it was it was enjoyable, actually. But but that's where we heard about the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And so people were getting prayed for, and people were praying for me. I could feel this intense heat and pressure, but because I was expecting to speak in tongues, nothing was coming out. So I was like, that's not happening to me. I discovered later Fiona was just sitting quietly in the corner of the room and the Spirit came upon her and she was baptised in the Holy Spirit. And I'm going, trying to make it happen.
So funny.
I mean, it was later, my friend's bedroom, put his hands, laid his hands on me and I started speaking in tongues and stuff much later, But so that was so where funny. I began to get exposed to charismatic things. So I guess the leap to Pentecostalism wasn't such a huge leap for me because I was already beginning to understand prophecy and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I guess exposure to holiness stuff, I mean, that's really big in Pentecostal circles. Like, I mean, it's kind of a perfect blend in a sense.
So spent 3 years there. Every year I wanted to leave and God just kept saying, I told you to stay for 3 years. And it was good for me, because when I became a believer, I had come out of a life of hedonism. So I was used to getting out of bed at 2:00 in the afternoon. Unless it was Saturday, I'd get up at 10 because the pubs opened at 11. And I'd spend all day in the pub and then come home, get changed and go to a nightclub. Sometimes I didn't go home and get changed. I just went to the nightclub. And so my body was in this crazy rhythm,
Yeah.
And so it was good for me that way and that discipline.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the guys telling me that the student council wanted me to come on the student council and but the faculty were like, no, he's trouble. So because to put it in the King James language, I kicked against the pricks. That's not what I mean. The faculty were. I mean,
I know.
I kicked against authority, and they just thought I would stir up too much trouble.
Yeah.
That's funny. So the vote was rigged.
So it was still part of your dynamic as well, though. You hadn't changed in a lot of ways in your nature of you still were pushing against authority. You're still challenging authority.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I mean that's a big thing that gets. There's a strong attempt to squash that in. Not. I wouldn't say that it's a manipulative, controlling, the leaders are trying to squash people like that. But I just think it as a system, when you go into a big organization like that, generally speaking, that kind of thing gets squashed down. So it's really interesting that you were still pushing against that.
I kind of got this shaggy perm thing, kind of Stone Roses. Here. And I remember getting pulled into the principal's office and kind of saying you'd heard me preaching. He was like, you've got something to say. People need to hear you, but they're not going to relate to you with that. You need to get your hair cut and stuff. And I was just like,
over my dead body.
Seriously, that's your problem. Yeah. I need a haircut. While I was close to the start of my second year at college, there was a little church that was struggling, and they asked the church, who did they want to come and help them? They asked for me. I preached there in my first year, and they must have liked what they heard and what they saw. So I spent the rest of my years at college pastoring that little church. I shouldn't have been. They needed someone with experience to build it and everything else. But it was a difficult time for them, difficult time for me.
Yeah.
But eventually I graduated, while I was there, Fiona was working. She worked first of all in the kitchens there, having just graduated as a teacher. But then she became the nursery teacher. So she spent a couple of years there as a nursery teacher. Back up to Glasgow. Obviously I'm not getting into ministry with Elam. And I ended up in the Social Security. So I was there for, I think, from early 92 through to middle of 2005. So 13 and a half years working in the Social Security. Hated it most of the time.
Yeah. How did you feel about that? Because you felt like you'd had this big calling to go into ministry. how did you navigate that? Like, was that a thing of like, oh, maybe I was wrong, or or
No,
this is my ministry? Or
again, because of that idea of me being resistant to authority, I was just like, what do those a-holes know?
Right.
I'm the man.
Yeah.
No, that's probably exaggerating it a little bit, but no, I was still certain of my call. I just didn't know how it was going to work out.
Right.
And of course, again, you're thinking that if God calls you, it's only to the pastoral ministry.
Yeah.
And that was reinforced at Bible school because that's the only people they would ordain were pastors. They changed a few years later to ordain evangelists as well. But, so I worked in social security. I was heavily involved in church life, in leadership teams, prayer teams, prophetic teams, all of this, all of this kind of thing. So very, very heavily involved. And then what happened after that? I'm trying to think. Yes, 1993, we left big charismatic Baptist church in Glasgow to plant a church in the West End independently. We were living over kind of between kind of Drumchapel and Clydebank in that area. The church we were part of didn't feel certain about planting a church, so we said, well, we're doing it anyway. We feel that's what's in our hearts. And so we started doing an alpha course in our home, gathered a number of people, and we're doing home meetings. When a guy I knew from Bible school, he was pastoring a little small Elam church in Anniesland, which was about 2 miles from where we lived. And he was leaving to go to the States. So he ended up speaking to the superintendent that, hey, John did 3 years at the Bible school. He's living in the area. Things have changed within Elam. His stance on alcohol and premillennialism isn't a barrier anymore. Why don't you talk to him? And so that's what happened in 2004. Was it 2004? Yes, 2004. I ended up... sorry, I said 93. It was 2003 I left to plant the church, sorry.
Right, okay. I just thought we were doing a really big rewind, but no, okay, that makes more sense.
93 is when we joined that big charismatic church.
Yeah.
2003 was when we went to plant the church. And then 2004, Elam came to me and asked if I would consider taking on this little church plant that had like 6 or 8 people in it. So we did that. Actually, quite a few of the people we gathered in our home decided not to come with us because it was like, for them it was structured religion, organised religion. They didn't want to be part of that, which was a shame. We kept connection with them though, So I started doing that in September 2004. The place was a dump. We changed all of that, put carpets in, put heating in, sound system, all of that kind of stuff. The stuff you do in modern church. Yeah. By the time we built it up to a couple of dozen people, and probably only 2 of the original 6 or 8 people were still with us, which was actually necessary, And we started. So that was 2004. Yeah. So 2005, I had the opportunity to go to Toronto.
Okay.
Catch the Fire Church there for a month. They were doing a leaders. They call it an international leaders school, but it's really kind of like a retreat type of healing, And during that time, there was a week with a couple called James and Denise Jordan, who are from New Zealand. Now, I'd heard James preach a couple of times in Glasgow, and I thought, this is good stuff. It was up here for me, in my head. But I think probably something had lodged in my heart, a little seed that I wasn't aware of. And so that was an extra incentive for us to go. So we went and spent a month in Toronto. I quit the social security before I went to Toronto. I'd been working part-time in church, part-time in the social.
Right.
I quit that, went to Toronto, spent a month there, and that week with James and Denise was probably the most devastating week of my life. My heart was ripped out because I began to understand all that I'd missed out on in life. I began to understand why I was rebellious or seemingly rebellious. Part of it was my character. Part of it was the prophetic nature that God had put in me, and part of it was just my brokenness. I began to understand that, but I began to understand what I'd missed out on by not being parented growing up.
Right.
And I hadn't really been parented. My dad was disabled from pretty soon after my birth, died when I was 11 years old. My mum's got a disabled husband, 3 young children, all within 3 years of each other. I think between me and my youngest sibling, there are 27 months between us.
Wow.
11 months between me and my sister. So when I'm 2 months old, my mum's pregnant again. But I began to realise all that I'd missed out on. I remember one of the memories that stood out to me that really caused me a great deal of pain was I loved playing football, soccer for those in the States. And I was a regular in the team at school. But if someone who wasn't a regular in the team had their dad come to watch them, I would get dropped and they would get to play instead of me. And that really caused me a lot of pain and anger. I remember beating up one of the boys. I was 11 years old, 10 years old when I did, and I beat this kid up just because I hated him. He hadn't really done anything to me, but he just became a focal point of my anger because, my pain had to go somewhere, And unfortunately for him, it fell upon him because the only other person to take the anger out on was me.
Yeah.
Because there must be something wrong with me. And that was too great to bear. So all of this pain is coming out during this week with James Jordan and Denise. And I remember there's one incident. So he has everyone get together into pairs, and you have to look in each other's eyes and sing, instead of Jesus loves me, this I know, you have to sing Father loves me. So it's like, Father loves me, this I know. And so people are getting into pairs, and I sat like this. I'm sitting in the front because, that's where the anointing is the strongest, brother. So I'm sitting in the front and I've got my arms crossed and I'm just like, and everything in my face is saying, fuck off. Fuck off.
Yeah.
So, and people are coming up to me and then just swerving. So they're all standing there going, Father loves, and I'm sitting in my chair like, like Dick Dastardly and Muttley. Fishing.
Right,
Fishing. Because I was just so much in pain, Phil.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do with it. I remember in one seminar in Toronto, you go into the main church and then you turn left up these stairs onto a mezzanine where there are offices and seminar rooms. And right at the end of the mezzanine, there were some empty offices and a little alcove. And I went and sat in the alcove and I cursed James Jordan upside down, inside out. I was just like, bastards, all of that kind of stuff. Because all this pain is coming up and it's got nowhere to go.
Yeah.
It was too painful to sit in the seminar. I didn't know what to do with love. That was the issue.
Yeah.
When I look back, I realised when I was first married, we'd go to bed at night, Fiona would put her arms around me, and some nights I would just freeze up and say, don't touch me.
Wow.
Because I didn't know what to do with love. I didn't know how to let it in. I didn't know how to receive it. I was afraid of what it would do to me. Because one of I speak to a therapist every now and again, and one of the things I was saying to her was that I was afraid of letting anyone in, because there's a song, Johnny Cash did a great cover of it, Hurt by Trent Reznor, and in it he says, what have I become, my sweetest friend, and it says everyone goes away in the end. And that was a core belief of mine. Everyone goes away in the end, whether they abandon you, whether they die, so don't get attached. And so I had all of this inside me, and all of this stuff is roiling around inside me while I'm there in Toronto. And so it was very, very difficult week, very difficult month for my poor wife. And my friends, who we're still friends with today and we still see regularly, that come with us, we talk about it now and they're like, oh yeah, you were difficult to be around.
Wow.
We can laugh about it now, you know, but
it's
really difficult for Fiona. Really, really difficult for her.
I can imagine. Were you aware of the dynamics going on, or do you think this was all very like subconscious and it was making you angry, upset, defensive, all these things? Were you aware like, this is because I've got stuff that I need to work on here, or, you know, or were you really trying to shut this out? Like how did that manifest in you?
I was aware that there was work needing to be done, but it was painful to do it. You know, I'd been exposed to emotional healing, inner healing, whatever you want to call it. And I'd been ministering in that area. I'd received ministry in that area. And I was all fixed.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't. you know how it goes. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I learned was about forgiveness. And that's just deepened, you know, because you always did I forgive him. Swine.
Yeah.
But actually, I learned about forgiving from the heart. There's a thing, I speak about this in my first book, but there's a thing where we have this saying, you know, to err is human and to forgive is divine. And I realised that if forgiveness is a divine quality, then I can't do it without some kind of divine help. And so that's where I began to approach the whole forgiveness thing, like, you know, God, I can't do this. In fact, there's a lot of me in here in my heart doesn't actually want to forgive. You need to change my heart to enable me to release it, because all I'm doing is tormenting myself and torturing myself. And so that was part of the process of dealing with that pain. The other part of the process for dealing with that pain was actually dealing with my relationship with my mum and dad. Funnily enough, I think I had more problems with my mum, because you always do. When one dies, it's always the living one who gets the brunt of it.
Yeah.
You know, and so I began to deal with that issue. I actually wrote my mum a letter and saying, you know what, I've not been the son that you needed me or deserved me to be. I remember writing it by hand, not on computer, and crying my eyes out while I was doing it. As far as I know, my mum still got the letter. But she doesn't really talk about that kind of thing. It's a bit too touchy-feely.
Yeah.
My mum's a great woman. The older I've gotten, the more I've learned to appreciate her strength and her power and everything else.
I can't even imagine losing your husband, who was already disabled, you were looking after, with 3 kids, all the same sort of age. Like, oh my God. Yeah. And that generation as well. I mean, gosh, not even that generation, even my generation in Scotland's like, we don't talk about emotions. We don't go there.
No, my mum was 33 when my dad died, you know?
God.
We came home from school on the Friday and my mum just sat us down. The curtains were closed and I was like, uh-oh, something's wrong. The curtains aren't closed on a sunny Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock or whatever, you know? My mum took us in, actually, to the bedroom I shared with my brother, and she said, you know, your dad's not coming back. He'd been in hospital for respite. I knew what she meant, but my brother and sister were kind of like, what do you mean? I was like, wanted to kill them as well, you know?
Yeah.
I knew what you meant. And that day we get packed off to my cousin's, so we didn't get to the funeral or anything like that. So that was a huge thing that I held against my mum. And so having to work through all of that stuff as well, you know, like...
Yeah.
And I'm still working through childhood stuff of trauma, because I didn't speak to anyone about trauma as a kid. You know, when I had knives held at my throat when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, I didn't tell anyone. Well, if I told my mum, she wouldn't let me go out to the places that I wanted to go out to.
Yeah.
So there was never any comfort in my life. You know, I learned to comfort myself: alcohol, drugs, sex. So anyway, those were the issues that I had to work through while I was there in Toronto and beyond. You know, so that month finished. Come home. I'm pastoring, obviously. Sitting towards the end of August that year, sitting in the spare room, preparing my sermon. Fiona comes in and she's strumming on her guitar and kind of like doing the nice Christian thing, having a bit of worship and stuff, you know. And just what I call the presence of God, just this overwhelming sense of someone else being in the room.
Mm.
And very heavy and weighty, but not disturbingly so. Like peaceful at the same time.
Mm.
I just sat there, and I don't know, it could have been 2 minutes, it could have been 10 minutes. And I heard a voice call me son. I don't think it was audible, or it felt audible to me, you know. And I just broke. I wept and wept and wept. And I'd wept a lot with emotional healing and stuff. But these were different tears. This was like, it was almost like something had been taken off my shoulders, you know. Mm-hmm. It's interesting that God didn't say to me, like he didn't do the Star Wars thing, I am your father.
Yeah.
But he said who I am.
Yeah.
He identified who I am, which is, I guess, what I'd never really known. Who am I, you know? And so that began a whole other journey. I remember that night terrified to go to sleep in case it was gone in the morning, you know, but it wasn't. Mm. And it hasn't since then. And that was August 2005.
Wow.
I've just grown in that understanding of sonship, of being fathered. And there have been tough moments, because one of the things I've realized is if I really want to walk with God in that way, then I need to, you know, in the book of Hebrews, it says that he disciplines those he loves. And I always thought of discipline as punishment, but actually it's more like training. Discipline is more of a training thing. And so it means looking at the issues of my heart. You know, do I really want to become a better person? In Christian terms, do I want to become more Christ-like? Mm. Well, then I need to allow God to address the issues of my heart, the issues of my attitudes, and all of the rest of it. You know, and I don't just mean in terms of religious attitudes, but how do I treat my wife? How do I treat my friends? How do I perceive the poor? How do I perceive homosexual people, or transvestites, or transsexuals? Or, you know, how do I view these people? Because the fact is that there is not anyone in this earth that God doesn't love. Mm-hmm. And so how can I claim to be a son of God when there are areas of my heart that don't love people? You know, and so I realize now that when there are issues in my heart, it's an area of my heart that just needs to know love. Yeah. Because we get told all of this in Christianity. You need to love your neighbour. You need to love. And we do things that demonstrate love, but actually it's not coming out of love. It's coming out of religious duty or religious obligation. Yeah. And actually, I don't want to live like that. I don't believe that's how God wants me to live. But he wants me to live from a different place of motivation. Mm. And I believe that only love has the power to create that true motivation. Yeah. Will it always be extremely altruistic? Probably not. There will probably be mixed thoughts, motivations, because I'm human. You know, I'm a guy who's been broken in life and is slowly and surely been mended, been put back together by love. And I realize that love is the most important and most potent force in the universe. You know? And so I want to learn to live in love, because if I learn to live in love, then love will live in me. Yeah. You know, the Apostle Paul says in Corinthians, if you do not have love, then you're a clanging cymbal, a resounding gong. And that really has struck me, and it's something I think about often. If I don't have love, not if I don't do loving things, not if I don't perform loving acts, but if I don't have love, how do you have love? You know, it has to find some sort of resting place and dwelling place in you. Yeah. And so that's what I've been, I guess, trying to live with over the last 15 years, is how do I live in love and create a space in my life, in my heart, for love to dwell. Yeah. And become the motivating factor of all that I do. You know?
That's a profound experience, kind of multiple profound experiences, I guess, kind of chained on top of each other. But to have something like that radically alters kind of like your foundation, like the very benchmark of like, okay, this is where we start. And, you know, you talk about religion being something, or most Christians do love out of a place of obligation, out of performance of, we've got like these rules to uphold, we've got to tick this box, we've got to, you know, go love the poor, we've got to go feed the poor, we've got to go, you know, whatever it is, get people saved, but it's obligation.
And here's the thing, all of those things, non-Christians do them.
Yeah.
They feed the poor, they care for their neighbours. So what's the difference, you know? And I think a lot of people do it the same as Christians. We want to love people. And I think the world wants to know love. And so they act out of that desire for love to be demonstrated and to be received. But also because they have compassion, which within the Christian bubble is a strange concept. Non-Christians have compassion?
Yeah.
Well, of course they do. Because they're also created in the image of God.
Yeah.
You know, and so there has to be something different about divine love. That will attract people, not to me, but to God, without me having to preach at them and tell them they're dirty, rotten, miserable sinners, which I don't believe, by the way.
Yeah. No. Well, it seems to me that a lot of so in my experience of watching people kind of have profound experiences where they change either within the church or come out of the church and have these profound experiences, it does feel that most people are trying to escape this kind of religious, guilt-ridden, shame-driven obligation to try and be loving, try and be the good Christian, try and be whatever. What happens is actually something that is very hard to exist in much of the conventional church, which is a love for self. You know, like, I think what you are describing there is there's something about a God who relates to us as Father, that sees us as children, that says, "You're my son." There's something about that relationship, that concept. I think this is part of what Jesus is hammering home, is that it doesn't really matter when you're a kid. Your papa loves you. And there's this thing of going, so my default is I'm lovable. I am lovable. And what does it look like for me to look in the mirror and go, I'm amazing. I love me. This is great. And yeah, I've got flaws and whatever, but actually that doesn't matter. And actually that might even be part of that whole thing. That's a profound shift that often people have to walk away from a lot of conventional Christianity to find. I know atheists that get that better and therefore love in what I would call a much more divine way than many of their Christian friends. Not to say that it is either or. I know a lot of atheists that are terrible people, and I know a lot of Christians that are deeply loving, profound, you know, like someone like yourself.
But
I'm sorry to call you a Christian.
Who's to say that that's not the love of God that atheist is loving other people with?
Absolutely.
You see, because we've restricted God to the bubble of Christian religion. Yeah. But actually he exists outside of that bubble. And I believe he works outside of that bubble. You know? I remember, I think I told you before, I remember doing some street evangelism stuff when I was at Bible school out in London, and speaking to this Buddhist guy, and suddenly he spoke to me and I was like, that was God. No, that couldn't have been God. That was the Holy Spirit speaking to me, prophesying to me. No, but it can't be, because he's a Buddhist. And so it's like...
Stuck in this terrible place. You either have to reject this amazing word or accept a Buddhist. How do we...
If we believe that God spoke through a donkey, then surely he can speak through a Buddhist. You know, so I think one of the things I realised that this whole revelation of love is doing, and it has been revelation, it's not been something I've been learning from books or anything, but it's stopped me trying to change people and trying to fix people, because I don't have the capacity to do that, and I realise that now. You know, stop trying to change my wife. Stop trying to change people that come to me for advice. All of that kind of stuff, you know. I remember the first time I realised that was happening was actually one of the girls who had come to the little house group we'd started in 2003. She was still occasionally popping into the church visits and stuff. And she said, you know what, I'm getting a hard time from my daughter and her boyfriend. I said, why? She said, well, they're giving me a hard time saying, no, you're not really a Christian. And I said, well, okay, tell me the story. He said, well, I've got a little statue of Buddha sitting on my fireplace. And they keep saying, if you were a real Christian, you wouldn't have that. You'd get rid of that. That's an idol. And she said, what should I do? I was like, do you like it? She was like, yeah. I said, do you pray to it? She was like, no. Do you feel uncomfortable with it in your house? She was like, no. I said, well, keep enjoying it then. And I thought, wow. A couple of years ago, I'd have been like, you need
That's not the advice you would have given.
You need to burn it. Then you need to dig a hole and bury the ashes. You know, like,
and douse your house in holy water and anointing oil.
And I realised, like, wow, that's a huge shift. You know?
Yeah.
And so for me, that's been one of the biggest things that I know I can't change people and I can't fix people anymore.
Yeah.
In fact, I might be slightly qualified to give them some spiritual advice, but not anything more than that. You know, so that's been a huge thing for me. It's improved my marriage a heck of a lot.
Yeah, it's amazing what it'll do for your relationships, every relationship really, when you start to go, maybe I'll try and I'll stop trying to change the person in front of me and just love them and accept that they are who they are, and maybe I should just love that. My God, that's amazing what that does. Yeah. That's
been huge. Now, it doesn't mean I don't address the stuff that comes up in my heart, but I'm not looking for things to fix. Yeah. If stuff comes up, then I'll talk to a therapist, I'll talk to a friend, I'll pray or whatever, you know. I don't even know how to do that much anymore, that praying thing.
So talk to me about that gap. So you've got this profound experience with God, and obviously it rooting in this very beautiful divine thing that most of us have no idea what we're even talking about when we're going, what the heck is this thing, love? But you know, from that, it feels like there's many different directions people can go. Maybe there isn't. Maybe there is an inevitable drag towards a certain place. But you are now in a place where you're like, well, I'm not even sure I think about prayer, or I'm not even, I don't want to be particularly called a Christian. But like that's quite a pull that has happened, or a navigation away from where you were, a bit like with the conversation with the Buddha statue, you know, and maybe not one that you've intellectually kind of forced yourself on. Like, I'm sure you hadn't read books about what to do with a Buddha statue if someone comes up to you, or, you know, but it's just, it's something that you've naturally gone, I didn't even realize that I would have changed my opinion on that. It just has over time, and that's how love is just presenting. What are some of the other ways that I guess that has challenged where you were with conventional Christianity to be moved to where you are today? Like it feels like there must have been quite a few different changes for you to feel
it's been
a bit different.
There have been processes and stages. I mean, it's funny. I was pastoring, obviously, when this all happened. I got ordained in 2008, in the May 2008, and then I left the ministry in August 2008.
A good 3 months.
So, but... and that was a process of leaving them, you know, contemplation and all the rest of it. And then 2 years of doing nothing. When I couldn't get a job. I tried. Couldn't get a job. Couldn't get another church. Nothing, you know. And then in 2009, I went to a Fatherheart Ministries thing, which is the ministry James and Denise Jordan had started in the 90s. Right. I went to an event that they put on down in Hemel Hempstead, and I met some of the guys there, and next thing I knew was I got an invitation to go out to New Zealand in 2010. So I went out to New Zealand in August 2010, spent a month out there. And I can't say that there's any big profound experience, but something of the heart, the spirit, the guts of what they were about kind of connected with me. I remember coming back, and I was part of a prophetic ministry at the time, and they were saying to me, like, so what happened in New Zealand? I said, it was great. It was really good. Just say, so what happened? You know, you've got a vision for the future. You know where you're going now. And I went, no. No, they were like, maybe we need to talk. I was like, no, I don't think we do, actually. I'm all right. I'm all right with not having any of that. So that was a huge thing for me. But anyway, then they do these Fatherheart weeks, which is really the two aims of which they say is one, to give a good biblical understanding of the place of the love of God as a father in the life of a believer. And the second one is to create a space where you can experience that for yourself. And so I began to get involved in doing those things, and then conferences. And so from January 2011, I've been traveling around the world. I think the only continent I've not been on is Antarctica.
Wow.
So just talking about God as a father, but pursuing that for myself, just seeking to, what does it look like to live loved? Yeah. You know, I spent a bit of time looking at Corinthians 13, where Paul talks obviously about love. And I realised that he wasn't giving us a recipe, but actually saying this is what love will produce in you when you have love in you. So I realised that the aim for me as a believer is to allow love to possess me, if you like, to such a degree that it grows patience in me and kindness in me, and you get to the point where I'm not rude to people. I'm long suffering with others. You know, that kind of stuff. And so it's been pursuing that as I've been talking about God as a father with these places around the world. Some of it's been great, some of it's been okay, you know. I'm just trying to grow in love and learn what it is to be loved, because I'd never really known that. Now, my mum and dad loved me in the way that they knew how to. They provided for me. They put food on the table. They put clothes on my back. You know, I never went hungry. I never went unclothed, even if sometimes I was wearing my mum's clothes, not her dresses, just ski pants, you know. Because
or a policeman's jacket.
So, but it wasn't the kind of love that I connected with necessarily, you know. The comfort, the embraces, I didn't have any of that. And so learning, I didn't know what love was. I didn't understand love. And so it's been learning that over the years. But that's then led me into a journey of, well, if this is how God wants to walk with me, live with me, how does that connect with all that I know about him so far? And so love began to dismantle what I thought I knew about God. You know, I thought God was angry with the world, but actually, as I look through the Bible, that's not what I see. And I see it's what some people present him as, but it's actually not what I hear from his own heart. You know, it's interesting as I look at all the prophets of the Old Testament, and we focus on they're angry but actually the message they've got all the time is God saying, come back to me, return to me, I want you back. You know, so that made me look at, well, when did we leave him? And that goes right back to the garden. Whether you believe figuratively of Adam and Eve, whether you believe literally of Adam and Eve, the fact is that God was not angry with them. You know, we look at God as a punisher of sin and sinners, and we take that from Genesis. You know, Adam eats the fruit, runs off and hides in the garden. God comes looking for him and says, "What have you done? Right, get out." You know, But actually, when you read it, that's not what happens.
No.
Adam changes his approach to God. God doesn't change his approach to Adam. And even, when they get put out of the garden, God goes with them, because the woman says, with the help of the Lord, I've given birth. Yeah. God speaks to Cain and Abel about their dispute. And in fact, when Cain kills his brother, God doesn't punish him. We say, yeah, but he put the mark of Cain on him. Yeah, that was a mark to warn people not to kill Cain. He preserved Cain's life from retribution and revenge from others. And even when he puts the man and woman out of the garden, it's not a punishment. He gives the reason for putting them out of the garden. He says, now the man has become like one of us, knowing good from evil. He must not be allowed to reach out and eat also from the tree of life and live forever. And then it says he put him out of the garden. So the reason for being put out of the garden wasn't as a punishment for sin or disobedience. It was so that the man wouldn't live forever.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? If the man had stayed in the garden with his wife and eaten from the tree of life, they'd be alive today if you believe in the physical Adam and Eve. But what would he have become? I always imagine him becoming something like Gollum in Lord of the Rings. This shriveled, wizened, insane caricature of what a man should be. And so to save him from that, God put him out of the garden. He saved him from a horrific future of eternal torment, which then leads to the whole hell thing of eternal torment. Yeah. God saved the man from eternal torment. Why would he put man back into eternal torment? Interesting thought. But I won't go there just
yeah,
yet.
well, I mean, it just does feel that, the Bible is so, it's just a complex document, and it's funny that you've done 3 years of Bible study, our Bible college education on it, and you'll know in and of yourself, because you've studied since then, that barely scratched the surface, right? You came out of your Bible college that would be very passionate about this is the eschatology to believe in. And yet, if you were to ask, if they were to go, what do you believe in? Oh, I'm actually not sure what the other options are. And it's like, well, your Bible college didn't do a very good job, because at least to teach you need to believe this. You need to teach the other ideas to show how crap they are at the very least, right? Yeah. It feels like the average person just picking up a book, people like you and me that get to do what we do mostly full time. We get to spend hours a day reading about these things, studying, learning. Most people don't get the privilege of that. They pick up a Bible and they read the story, a couple chapters for the day as a quiet time or whatever. And they're expected to be able to, in that process, divine whatever God is saying. And we have all kinds of phrases we'll throw. The Holy Spirit will teach you what it says and this and that. But the truth is, generally speaking, Holy Spirit will teach you exactly what your pastor would say on that passage. And that's about it. People tend not to have the most profound, radical, different thoughts, despite the fact that the church next door, the people reading it might come up with that. You read the prophet and the prophet is angry and we go, oh, God gets really pissed off when we're wrong. And it's like, okay, but actually, that prophet was angry because we were portraying God as pissed off. So is God a pissed off God, or is actually a loving God, and the prophet is trying to change our perspective of that? We read what we want almost.
I think there's also, I didn't set about to change my theology. And even now I still hold a tension between what I've always held to and what I'm seeing of who God really is. I think we'll always be doing that, because if we really believe in the bigness of God and the finiteness of ourselves, then we'll never get to the end of that. There'll always be new things to go, oh my goodness, that's completely contrary to what I thought. And so I never set out to do that. I just set out to learn to be loved. I remember in 2017 being in the US as part of one of these Fatherheart schools, and just standing up, introducing ourselves to the people and saying, I think the biggest thing for me in this is that I've come to like being me. I thought, oh my goodness, I like being John MacDonald for the first time in my life. I'll be 60 next year.
Wow.
And it's only 3 or 4 years ago that I realised I liked John. You know? And so that's the journey I was on, really, I guess. But then, as I'm learning from love about, if God is love itself, then what I'm experiencing is God.
Mm.
And so he's nothing like the one that I learned. So it means that I'm starting to question everything about what I've thought. I'm questioning the Bible. I'm questioning the idea of sin and salvation and everything else. And it's a difficult process.
Mm.
It's a confusing process because you're pulled between, if I really come out and say, I'm thinking this, then am I a heretic? What am I? You know?
Mm.
Excuse me. So, but it's leading me on a path where I just can't see myself aligned with the Christianity that I was brought into back in 1985.
Mm.
You know, God's not angry. He's never been angry with us. That's why the Bible says God so loved the world, he sent his son. But the gospel we've been preaching is that God is so angry with the world, he sent Jesus to stop him from destroying the world. That's the gospel we've preached for centuries now.
Yeah.
When actually the gospel is God loves you so much. He loved you before the foundation of the earth. In fact, before the foundation of the earth, he prepared an inheritance for you.
Mm.
You know, that could only be realized when Christ came to change everything.
Yeah.
You know, and I've come to look at the cross in a whole different light. I no longer believe Jesus took my punishment on the cross because I don't believe God ever intended to punish me.
Mm.
I believe what Jesus did was take the power of sin, if you like, and the power of death to separate us from God and killed it on the cross. He nullified its power, if you like. Yeah. I don't know why he had to do it that way, through death. I don't have an answer to that. Maybe I will one day, and maybe I'll never have an answer to it. But I believe that, you know, everything that you read in Romans and in Colossians and everything else, it says that Jesus took everything that was against us, died, took it onto the cross with himself, died, took it to the grave, and then only one of them came out of the grave, if you believe in all the resurrection and everything else. And so all of that other stuff that was against us was put in the grave. We no longer need to be afraid of approaching God because of this stuff. I think the power of sin was the lie that God doesn't like you. I think that was the power of sin. God doesn't like you. God's against you. God hates you. And realizing that lie has been broken and that God actually welcomes us to come to him in whatever state and condition we're in. You know, straight, gay, lesbian, freak, atheist. I don't know if an atheist can come to God because that's a confusing one. Sorry for you guys who are listening who may be atheists. I don't mean to kill you. So it's challenging all of that stuff, you know?
Yeah.
The inerrancy of the Bible. I mean, this is an argument that's been going on for almost 2,000 years. And it's still not settled. I believe the Bible is useful for training and instruction, as Paul wrote to Timothy. But every word was dictated by God? No, because it came through broken human beings. So the Apostle Paul said, we, so I'm assuming he's including himself in that as an apostle and a prophet and a writer of scripture. He's saying, we only see dimly. We only know in part. And so for me, does that include the prophets of the Old Testament? They only see dimly and know in part. And so therefore, God did speak to them. I absolutely believe that. But their understanding of what he was saying was limited by their worldview, their upbringing, their culture. And so they spoke what they thought he was saying in that culture, out of that understanding, and presented God in a way that people could relate to and understand, because it's how all the other gods around them were. The gods of the Philistines and the Armenians or whatever, you know. And so, but then, because that's when you go to the book of Hebrews, and it says, you know, in former times and in different ways God spoke through the prophets, but today he speaks through his Son. Well, why did Jesus have to come if the prophets had perfectly presented the will of God? Because what we see of Jesus in the gospel seems to be contrary to what the prophets taught. You know, he says things like, you've heard it said, but I'm telling you this instead. And so it seemed to me that what the prophets gave us in the Old Testament was an imperfect representation of who God is. And so he had to send his Son, who bears his image, who says, I only do what I see him doing, I only say what I hear him speaking. Because he was the only person who could properly represent and give us the full picture of what God is really like. And this understanding for me is completely different from what I was taught, from what I grew up with, from what evangelicalism told me. And so it's leading me down paths where I think, am I a heretic now? Is that where I am? You know, am I one of these weird guys claiming to know God and who's really off his nut?
Yeah. How do you navigate that? You know, I mean, because that's a reasonable fear. I mean, if you're like, gosh, well, the prophet's got it wrong sometime. There's a good chance maybe John MacDonald's got it wrong sometimes. And that's a very, unsettling thought for a lot of people, to be growing and changing their views and challenging things that were the status quo for them. But in the back of their head to be like, oh, I might be wrong. What if I'm wrong? Like, how have you gone about like navigating and coming to terms with this very rapidly and drastically evolving faith being so different from what you once kind of thought was the thing that was the thing? You know, if you didn't have that, you're out of shit luck. You know, you're out, aren't you? Yeah.
You know,
so it seems like it's suddenly a bit more grey, or the in category has like expanded, or, you know, like that's a very unsettling thing to be going through if you're kind of holding both of those on some level in tension.
I don't know is a phrase that I've become accustomed to using.
Yeah, no, me too. Absolutely. It's my number one go-to answer.
It's funny because in some ways there's still a certainty about the reality of God.
Sure.
And a certainty but the certainty about him is that he is love. I mean, that's the core of his essence. And so is this now? People think, well, so you're doing away and God lets everything go and you can do what you like and God will just love you. Well, yes and no. Yes, he will still love you. But I think walking in a relationship with him is yielding to love. And love does discipline you. Love does train you how to be loving, how to walk. And I think by learning and yielding to that, I think that's what makes us more like him. You know, it's not having the right doctrine, the right theology, because that can always be corrected if it's wrong. You know, if I'm wrong, that can be corrected, whether it's through conversation with others, connecting with people like yourself or other people in Fatherheart Ministries. You know, but I want to be in love. I believe it's the only way to live, and I trust that the deeper I go into love, the greater that love will hold me in a place where, yeah, I might have things wrong, but I'm not going to be going off the deep end into some sort of lunacy where I'm the new Messiah or something. You know? Yeah. Where I'm not going to gather a cult around me and say like, okay, the spaceship's coming for us now. Let's all drink the Kool-Aid. You know? I'm learning to trust love.
Yeah.
And not try to run ahead of it and say, this is the thing, because I've been wrong before about this being the thing, and I might be wrong again. But so the only thing I can remain certain about is God is good.
Yeah.
And love is the greatest power in the universe. And so those are the kind of things I try to live with and live by.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't look like Jesus, then it's probably not from God. I mean, all you ever see from Jesus is kindness, compassion, care, provision. And he tells us that this is what God is like. In fact, the only time Jesus is angry is with religious people who are certain about what they know and what God is like. They're the only people that Jesus gets angry with. I mean, these so-called sinners, he doesn't get angry with them. He's compassionate towards them. He's forgiving towards them. You know? So, yeah, I guess that's a line where I say, does that look like the kind of behaviour Jesus demonstrates in the Gospels? Because if it's not, then it's probably not godly. That's one of the things I look at. Probably more complicated than that, but that's the concept I have.
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I've talked to so many people like that, and certainly that's certainly compatible with how I kind of like view the world myself. I mean, love is kind of my benchmark and the way that I kind of navigate, and I just try and stay in love. Like if I can be in love, then that to me is just grand. I don't really worry too much beyond that. I don't care what it's labeled. I don't care who it includes. I mean, all these kind of things is absolutely irrelevant to me. But it's killed a lot of my idols. It's killed a lot of my Christianity. A lot of my Christianity has not survived. And I'm okay with that. And I've become more Buddhist and Taoist and, everything else, because those things also have a bunch of love in them. And so you'll see the way I talk about something and they'll be like, that sounds Buddhist. And I'm like, yeah, it's a really loving way to approach life.
I think there's a crossover between, there are overlaps, I think, in different religions, in thought and philosophy, yeah.
I think it's ridiculous to presume that the human race for thousands upon thousands of years has been trying to answer the same question. What the hell is going on? Right? I mean, that's basically the main premise of our thrust is, what the frick is this? So we're trying to frame that and go, right, this collection of atoms have all kind of come together. We're hurtling through space on a rocket, tens of thousands of miles an hour, and nothing really feels very safe right now. And bit by bit, we've built a bit of certainty, safety. We've got some food, some houses, some relationships, and we're like, oh, this feels a bit safer, than the crazy wild. I mean, just watch a documentary, like a David Attenborough documentary. You're like, geez, I wouldn't want to be a rabbit. It looks terrifying 24/7, or, And so we've created this whole world and narrative where actually it's kind of nice to be a human. I definitely prefer being a human to a rabbit or whatever. Certainly a wild one. But there's this component where we have built these realities and this narrative of this is what it means to be human. This is what it means to be Phil. This is what it means to be on Earth or whatever. And it is ludicrous to think that we haven't, in separate cultures that have been disconnected from one another, that we haven't come to some of the same conclusions. It's also ludicrous to think that they would be identical conclusions. So it's, of course, if you go and look in the depths of Asia, of course they came to slightly different conclusions on what it means to be human and what this existence means to people in the kind of Mesopotamian, Middle Eastern region that became Jew, Christians. But of course they also agree that, being present is a good thing. Being loving is a good thing. Learning to love yourself is a really powerful thing. Who would have thought?
I think we forget. Sorry. I think we forget the things we base our religion on, if you like. We take it directly out of the Bible, but we don't necessarily take into account the cultural context. Because the cultural context is there in the Bible doesn't mean that God endorses it. The Bible's just saying this is what it was. But we've we seem to have taken some of it as this is God's way. Well, no, this is a description of the cultural context in which the prophets were speaking, or God was speaking, or Jesus was living. And you need to recognize that there's a cultural backdrop that the prophet is speaking into or speaking about, and not necessarily, his speaking is not necessarily an endorsement of it. He's just saying, this is the way it is, and I don't know if we recognize that. I think that's one of the things that Jesus tries to do in the Gospels. He tries to combat that and say, just because that's the way it was doesn't mean to say it's the way God wants it to be.
Sure.
So I think it's the same in any culture. You need to recognize that just because it's part of the culture doesn't mean to say it's the right way, or it's a good way, or it's a beneficial way. So, the missionaries go to, Papua New Guinea, and the first thing they do is not stop them cutting people's heads off and eating them, but put some clothes on. It's like, that's the thing they're offended about. Not the chopping off of heads. Because you should be decent.
A good Puritan people, yeah.
But that wasn't Papua New Guinea culture.
Yeah.
They didn't get aroused because they saw naked people.
Yeah. They're everywhere.
That was normal life. It was normal life, And so I don't think we always consider the cultural context or cultural implications of the things that we endorse or adopt.
Yeah.
We just go, that's all part of the package, when it's not necessarily so.
Yeah. Well, the way we whitewash the Bible with the current culture is just, it cracks me up. Like, there was a popular thing, I think last week, Harry Styles, a pop star, like dressed in a dress. And everyone and their mum had something to say, but all these Christian leaders were going, "No, this is disgusting. The falling apart of society, that Harry Styles isn't wearing trousers, they say pants or whatever." And I was laughing because, you're a Scot as well. And I'm like, oh, okay. So what would you do if you went into Scotland? And okay, we don't wear kilts very often these days, most of us. But, go to a formal event in Scotland and you'd be, oh my gosh, there's fallen, a good chunk of them be Christian. Men
showing their knees.
Absolutely.
But then again, when I think about it, Phil, when I was going clubbing in the 80s, there were guys that would come into the club wearing a dress and a pair of Doc Martens.
Absolutely. Well, people were laughing about it. It just shows the sign of the times that these pop stars these days are wearing dresses. I'm like, do you remember like the 70s, the 60s, 80s? I mean, Bowie, Elton John, Prince, Freddie. All these different people were doing wild and wacky things. George Michael, whoever. I don't know. Like, it's fascinating that we rewrite our history to fit our narrative, and we do it in the Bible, right? We read the Bible, and all the guys are wearing trousers, right? Jesus is walking around wearing a pair of trousers, wearing a pair of Levi's or something. It's like, no, he wore a big robe, but basically a dress.
He wore a ball.
All the guys. And so and then we do it with marriage or any of these things, right? Oh, marriage looked like what it did today, where we marry people for love. And it's like, no, everyone there married because of family arrangements and things like that. And it was quite common to have concubines and other marriages involved. And like, that was in the good Jewish community that was God-fearing, would still do all these things. And it wasn't that big a deal, right? No one really cared that Solomon had 600 wives. The only issue was that he sold some horses to Egypt. That was the issue, right? It's the Papua New Guinea scenario, right? It's like, God's what are we on, 600? Nah, what? Let's get 630 maybe. Oh wait, no, he sold some horses. We're done. That's it. Solomon's over.
Well, it's funny. I was speaking with someone yesterday about domestic abuse and stuff, and they'd written a poem because they'd suffered abuse, and they wrote a poem about it, and it had some swear words in it. And she said, in her book, she says, if you've got more of a problem with the swear words in this than the fact that I was abused, then you've got a problem.
Yeah. You are actively part of the system that supports abuse. At the end of the day, that is really what we're talking about. And Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, that's Tony Campolo was really famous for that, wasn't he? He would always say that he was the one that coins the, like, you know, that there's a million people dying because of no fucking water or whatever. And people would be like, oh, we can't have Tony Campolo back in our church. And he's like, that's what you heard in that sentence. Yeah. Not a million people die every year for no water. Or, you know, like, and that was the point.
Yeah.
And I think everyone that's a cool pastor has done that at some point now.
Well, was Mark Driscoll not known in America as the cussing pastor?
Yeah, there you go. Wow. Yeah, gosh. Mark, I was remembering Mark the other day with someone and we were having a good laugh. Oh, what a guy. Talking about trauma.
I wouldn't necessarily endorse his views, but
no, I don't know what his views are these days. Who knows?
No, I don't know now. I know when everything blew up, one of the first people to reach out to him was Paul Young.
Oh wow.
Paul reached out to him and said, like, dude, I'm here. You know.
Yeah.
That's what love looks like.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You know, people, I'm interviewing someone tomorrow. They fell from grace, if you want to put it that way, and dropped like a hot coal. You know, and it's just like, love doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
If we really are loving communities, we don't drop people because they screw up. We help put them back together again.
Yeah.
You know?
There's such a need to the veneer. There's such a huge need to have this nice, polished, clean looking, you know, you need to avoid the appearance of evil. Everything needs to look good, squeaky and clean, that we are so quick to throw people under the bus in
you can only do your evil
no
when the door's closed.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
you're
fascinating.
Right. You're right.
But what's interesting is, in an equal component, is how quick we forgive those at the top, however. So there's a component in play where I think there was a study on this. It was really fascinating, but they looked at how likely people are to be removed from church or kicked out of church for, I think it was adultery or something. And what was interesting is the higher up you were, the less likely you were to be kind of ostracized from the community. Mm-hmm. Because there was a component of, there was almost this component of, look how gracious we are. Look how we forgive, we practice this, but we only do it when the person is high enough that it's going to cause us major issues, or it can be a very public look at us. We did the forgiving thing, or, and it's, we're constantly playing the game in two different fields, or I don't know. I
think it's difficult, isn't it? Because I know there have been instances where men have been kicked out and brought before a panel, and and the panel's disciplined them and judged them, and there are guys sitting on the panel with the same issue in their lives. You know, it's just like, come on, let's learn to love. Love doesn't necessarily ignore the fact that you've screwed up, but it doesn't condemn you. I don't believe even God condemns you for screwing up. I believe what he wants to do is pick you up and put you back together again. Mm. And if the church is really his body, then isn't that what we should be a part of doing? We should be part of picking someone up and putting them back together again, so that they like themselves again. Because when you screw up, you hate yourself.
Yeah.
You know, even if you don't get caught, you hate yourself while you're screwing up.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so love just picks that person up and puts them back together and say, you know what, you're still worth something. You're still worth loving. You're still worth investing in, and you still have something to contribute.
Yeah.
But actually, religion says you're finished.
Mm.
That's it. You're done. And we wash our hands of you.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just so sad.
Yeah. I look at like how important, I mean, a lot of recent studies in the last kind of 10, 15 years have shown how important vulnerability and being open and just, you know, bearing your soul is in relationship, in loving yourself, in, you know, not living under huge weights of shame and guilt. And it just makes me think of the church, because we just do not do that. You know, we do the shame cycles and the guilt cycles, but there's a need for those in charge, for those that are the best guys, the good guys, the top guys, always guys as well. They all have to be squeaky clean, you know, because God forbid you found out your pastor was also addicted to porn. But what's interesting about the dynamic is actually it's been proven again and again and again when the pastors and the leaderships or whatever else go, look, yeah, I've got a problem with this as well, and I'm trying to figure it out or whatever, actually helps massively all the little guys, right? All the people that are literally day in, day out feeling absolutely shit like that. There's something about going, oh, my pastor also is trying to figure out how to walk the walk on this one as well. And
because those guys are sitting thinking, man, I'm a terrible Christian.
Yeah.
I'm an awful husband. I'm a terrible human being. You know, and actually my objection to pornography has nothing to do with religious morality. You know, it's actually, I just think it's a destructive force in relationships and in women's lives especially.
Yeah.
You know? But that's a whole other topic.
No, yeah. Well, I mean, the sexual ethics have talked about that in quite a few different contexts, but yeah, there's definitely a lot to be said in a lot of different areas about it. But yeah, it's fascinating. You know, people ask me all the time, like, how do I deal with struggling with porn? And I was like, the first thing you need to do is stop struggling. Right? Stop thinking this is some sort of epic battle that you're trying to overcome and win. And, you know, like the fact that you are making this a huge cosmic deal where God's sitting there going, there's a genocide happening. Oh, wait, hold on. Simon's wanking. We need to get on top of that. Put the genocide aside, Gabriel and Michael. We need to get on top of this over here because he's having a look at something he shouldn't. You know, what are we talking about?
I think when we look at things like pornography, alcohol, drugs, it's like, what is the underlying issue? Yeah. Pornography is not the issue. It's just a symptom. Mm-hmm. What is the issue? What is the pain? What is it you're trying to comfort? What is it you're afraid of that pornography helps you to cope with? You know, and I think for me, I mean, I struggled with pornography for years. And I came to that place where realizing, like, pornography is not my issue. Yeah. My issue is something in my heart. Yeah. You know, and so, again, you know, I've said it already, but for me, the focus of my life is, like, what's going on in my heart? Because that's, well, and again, if you're into the Bible, the Bible tells you in Proverbs 4, like, your heart is the wellspring of life. So is there something polluting the wellspring? Because it's not the pornography that's polluting it. It's something else. It's pain, it's brokenness, it's fear, it's shame. And I think your pornography issue, if you like, gets addressed when you look at the issues here rather than the issues on your screen. You know?
Yeah. Well, I see this again and again, and I think this is the fruit of the purity movement, according to a lot of experts, is a lot of very unhealthy marriages and relationships, because the church does have an answer to you struggling with porn and masturbation or whatever it is. Get married, right? It's you struggled with it when I was married, or this, and well, good. Oh, I'm sure your partner, you know, whether you're male or female, I'm sure your partner is so thankful that that's how you dealt with your issue, rather than dealing with the actual issue. You know,
and it creates.
Yeah, well, it creates a bunch of codependency or whatever. I mean, if you aren't healthy and can't be in a room on your own and be content without going, oh, maybe I'll, you know, do this, or maybe I'll do that, or maybe I feel this, like, if you can't, you know, sit without feeling shame and guilt or whatever, like, you're going to start displacing a lot of crap onto other people that you're dragging into your life to try and fix you.
The thing is, I mean, one of the things that shows, one, getting married doesn't stop you playing with porn. I know that from experience. And two, what porn is doing to relationships. I mean, they're saying that, looking at the statistics, that I was speaking to this lady yesterday, Natalie Collins, and she was saying that statistics show there's something like a 70% increase in women being choked, spat on, violently having their hair pulled during consensual sex. And where are the guys getting it from? They're getting it from porn, which they use to alleviate their feelings of not being enough of a man. Yeah. And so then they act out manliness that porn's told them by pulling their hair, spitting in their girlfriend's face during consensual sex, or throttling her, or putting their hands over her mouth and nose, because that's what they see. And you know, because the thing is, you start off looking at pictures of women's breasts, and then you start looking at pictures of their vagina, then you start looking at videos, and then you start looking at hardcore, and then, you know, it's like everything. It's like drugs, it's like alcohol, it progresses.
Yeah.
And actually it's not the real issue. The issue is something inside you that's broken or wounded, you know.
Yeah.
That's a conclusion I came to from my own life. I think it's probably pretty similar for a lot of men.
I'd imagine a lot of people. I think, well, the fact that we have this toxic masculine God, that if we don't look like that, and we are supposed to look, I mean, it's gonna come out as creating this gap between our masculinity and our identity, as a guy. For a lot of people, especially where the statistics show that men in the church are much more feminine than men outside the church. And there's lots of reasons for that. It's because they spend hours introverting and introspective and journaling and praying. And those are things that make you more emotional, they're more intentional with their relationships.
It's interesting because in a lot of churches now, there's a movement for men to be
more manly. Yeah.
To me, that displays an unnervingly ignorance of what a man is.
Yeah. A huge insecurity. Huge insecurity. I think there's someone said recently, I can't remember, I'm going to butcher the quote, but they basically said, you can tell how the church treats women by their fear of men being in any way, shape or form feminine.
Yeah.
And I think that sums up. It's a lot of it is to do with, when I was studying my series, I taught a series on homosexuality. When I was studying that, reading a lot of history is fascinating because homosexuality is not historical, but homoeroticism, it's the act of homoeroticism. What's interesting is in almost every culture, it's not wrong to have sex with a man. It's wrong to be receiving sex from a man. So to penetrate another man, not a problem historically. No one cares. But to be penetrated,
I remember reading that in Arab cultures and stuff. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so the component, I remember reading one passage where they were talking about these Roman citizens that were, or Roman soldiers ravaging this town, going through, and they were murdering everyone and they were raping everyone and all this different stuff. And it said, and this is an ancient document. It's funny how it's written because it says all this stuff matter of factly. They were murdering everyone and raping everyone and they were drowning babies and bashing babies' heads on the walls in front of their mothers. And they did it dressed as women. Could you believe it? And that was the offense. The offense was that these Roman soldiers dressed as women. And so there's this huge obsession with not changing these nice drawn lines between man and woman.
Well, that was the charges the church brought against Joan of Arc because she wore men's clothing. And she said that she wore men's clothing when she was imprisoned to stop them from abusing her and raping her.
Yeah. Yeah, well, God help us for that.
It's crazy. But it's interesting. When I was writing my book, Made in His Image, it's about misogyny and then looking at what do the scriptures really say about women in ministry and blah, blah, blah. But just discovering that and looking, I spent a couple of chapters talking about the femininity of God. Probably offended a few people. But,
I've no doubt.
But actually, it's all over scripture, God's femininity. It must be because the woman is made in His image. That's one of the, it's a thought for another book, actually, is the feminine heart of God. With it, I don't know, but that's beautiful. But we don't like to acknowledge that, do we? The whole Lord God Almighty, El Shaddai. A lot of people would say that is actually talking about breasts. Again, I talk about it in the book about the roots of it, and you see it in different parts of Scripture where Shad is speaking about breasts. And so they talk about God as the many-breasted one and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But somehow we've translated it to Lord God Almighty. This masculine champion.
As strong and manly and exactly. Yeah. Let's try
Marlborough man, he's got his Stetson on, smoking his roasted tobacco.
This 28-pack. John, this has been really great. I don't want to hold you up too much longer, but I've really enjoyed chatting, and maybe we can jump into another chat at some point in the future and go into some other bits and pieces. But I just love what you're doing. I love that you are still straddling that world very, very well and beautifully, and helping people that are in maybe more fundamental Christianity feel permission. I think that's one of the beautiful parts of the Father Heart is they go into churches and they do go into the Bible and they give you good Bible reasoning for starting to have an experience that's beyond where you're at.
That's one of the things for me, because that's what I was introduced to as a believer. The Bible is the foundation kind of thing, you know.
Yeah.
It's funny. I've had discussions with fundamental people who have rejected the whole Father Heart thing because I told them God wasn't angry and didn't punish the man and woman in the garden. So they've rejected the whole thing because I showed them.
I can well imagine it. People are rooted in their interpretations, and there is no other interpretation. There is no other way to read it. There is no other way to see it. But I really do love what you're doing, and I think it's a hugely important thing. And I think, you know, in this journey of evolving faith and change and growth, there's few things like bringing people into an experience of learning to love themselves and learn that they're lovable and valuable and amazing. That changes so much. And like you've experienced, it opens you up to some radical change in life and theology and experience. How can people connect with what you're doing? Like, you've got a podcast, you've got your books. I mean, like, give us some ways that people can connect.
Well, I have the website, sonship.co.uk. And that'll have links to my podcast, the ABBA podcast with John MacDonald, links to various other things that I do.
Great. And then, are you on social media? Are you quite active on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at OneJohnMac. I'm on Facebook.
Yep.
I've got about 5 different pages on Facebook.
Okay. Will they find them through your website and stuff? I'll try and find one and link it.
Yeah, there's links on my website to Facebook, to Twitter, to as I say, the podcast. I think Instagram as well. You know, so there's links to all those things on the website.
Wonderful. Well, I would encourage people to check you out, and it's been really great to chat and catch up and dive into some of your story more.
Always great fun to catch up with you, mate.
Absolutely. I love it. It's good. Good to see. Really good to see. Hope you guys are doing well. You recover from your stint of COVID. And,
we're getting
back to full health.
Fiona's a little bit behind me, but I'm almost fully over it.
Yeah. You're going to be doing your shuttle runs up and down the stairs soon. Maybe not. Workout. Yeah. All right. Love you, man. I'll catch you later, yeah?
Love you, bro. Take care.
All right. Peace.
Bye-bye.